Wild Hearts Burning Love. Synopsis. When the debt collector kept pressuring her for the 2 million baht she owed, Sujira could no longer sit idly by. She decided to solve her problem by selling herself to a rugged man like Panlop. She only wanted enough money to settle the debt, or at least cover the interest. However, the rugged man, Panlop, had no intention of letting her go so easily. When he set his heart on someone, he was ready to love that woman with all his heart. He wouldn't leave, wouldn't die, and was as stubborn as they come. Panlop's unique trait as a wild man. Chapter 1. In a dimly lit, musty room where the air rarely circulated, Panlop, a 30-year-old man indifferent to the outside world, lay sprawled out, casually smoking a cigarette. He exhaled, releasing rings of smoke with a relaxed demeanor. He was ruggedly handsome, with sharp features, a chiseled nose, pale red lips, and piercing brownish-red eyes that occasionally betrayed a tinge of weariness against his world-weary face. Bang! Jod, his only trusted henchman, burst in with a woman in tow. Jod knew his boss's preferences well. Panlop glanced lazily in their direction as Jod motioned toward the woman. "How about this one, boss?" The woman was pale, with delicate but unremarkable features. Nothing stood out about her appearance. Panlop's gaze traveled down from her chest to her modestly proportioned hips. Jod scratched his head awkwardly. "She insisted, boss. So I thought I'd bring her." Jod reached for her wrist to lead her out, but Panlop suddenly changed his mind. "Wait!" he barked. Jod froze in place, and the woman's face lit up with a glimmer of hope. Panlop narrowed his eyes in curiosity, circling her like a predator assessing its prey. Jod observed his boss's movements and couldn't help but think, he's sniffing her out like a dog. But he kept his thoughts to himself. Panlop's temper was notorious, and a slip of the tongue could earn him a swift punishment. "What's your name?" Panlop asked abruptly. The woman's eyes widened, as though she'd been jolted from a trance. My name is Sujira," she stammered, her heart pounding so hard that Panlop could almost feel it. "Nickname?" he pressed, his gaze narrowing as though to hypnotize her. "Jira," she murmured, lowering her head. Before she could react, Panlop grabbed her waist without warning, his rough hands seizing her like a predator catching its prey. Sujira gasped and instinctively glared at him with a fiery expression. There it was, the mysterious glint in her eyes. "Fine. I'll take her." "Jod, get out and lock the door from the outside. This is getting exciting," Panlop ordered. Sujira felt a pang of fear but fought to maintain her composure. Jod stomped out, locking the door as instructed. Now, it was just Sujira and Panlop. "Your heart's racing. So what are you good at?" he asked as he strode toward the disheveled bed, which looked like it hadn't been cared for in ages. Sujira glanced at the beer cans scattered in a small cooler before turning back to him. "Would you like a beer first?" "I can open one for you," she offered, sweetening her voice. Panlop snorted and patted the mattress. "No need. Sit here," he commanded. Her anxiety spiked. How could she feel so scared now? Her heart pounded even harder as she hesitantly approached the edge of the bed. Panlop reached out, grabbed her waist, and pulled her into his firm embrace. He tilted her face toward his and crushed his lips against hers, his breath thick with the scent of burnt tobacco. Page. Sujira nearly choked, her hands pushing futilely against him. "What now?" he growled, irritated, as he pulled back to stare at her. She panted heavily, wiping her mouth with her sleeve in disgust. "Take off your shirt," he ordered with increasing annoyance. "Ah! Now!" The sharpness in his voice left no room for argument. She hesitated, feeling humiliated by his disparaging remark. "Not that pretty, and you're still playing hard to get?" Stung by his words, Sujira lowered her head and reluctantly pulled her shirt over her head, placing it on the bed. "Ugh, what a tease," he muttered under his breath, his frustration evident. "Jod, get back here," he yelled. But Sujira quickly grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. "I'll undress quickly. Please don't call him." "Fine. Hurry up," he relented, shaking her off as he reached for a cigarette and lit it to calm his nerves. Sujira stood up and unclasped her bra with trembling hands. "I might forgive you after all." Panlop chuckled with satisfaction as she bit her lip and slid her skirt to the floor, leaving only her black underwear. "Ah!" he murmured appreciatively, watching her closely. But then, she changed her mind. She bent down to pick up her clothes, hurriedly putting them back on. "Hey! Are you trying to raise your price?" Panlop shouted angrily. "I'm sorry. I just can't. I've never done this before," Sujira stammered, her voice trembling. Panlop burst into laughter, staring at her incredulously. "Never?" he repeated. She nodded, her head bobbing like a frightened child. "I don't believe you. Now get on this bed already," he commanded, grabbing her by the waist and tossing her onto the mattress. "Let me go," she screamed, kicking wildly in protest. "Why the hell did you offer yourself in the first place, huh?" Panlop barked, pinning her beneath his weight. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I'll leave and never come back, I promise," she cried, pressing her palms together in a pleading gesture. "Not a chance. I've seen your body, and I like it," he declared, diving in to kiss her cheeks, ignoring her cries. "Stop it!" she screamed, thrashing about until he sat back, visibly frustrated. "Fine. Stop yelling already," he growled, raising his hand as though to strike her but stopping when he saw her terrified expression. "It won't hurt. Trust me," he said softly. Sujira's eyes remained doubtful, but she stayed silent, trembling as she gazed up at him. Panlop leaned in, kissing her forehead gently before moving to her lips again. He deepened the kiss, exploring her mouth with a slow intensity. She began to succumb, though her movements were clumsy and unsure. "Have you really never done this before?" he whispered. "Never. I swear," she pleaded, tears pooling in her eyes. "You'll like it, Jira," he murmured, his tone filled with desire. Realizing her innocence, a twisted satisfaction spread across his face. "You're mine now. No one else can have you." His voice was both a declaration and a command, leaving no room for argument. Sujira bit her lip, lying still as Panlop embraced her with an inexplicable mix of emotions. He planted a kiss on her cheek as if to seal his claim. She must never forget. She was his and his alone. Chapter 2. It felt like something was missing. Panlop reached out aimlessly, searching for his new wife with his eyes still closed. His hand met only empty air. His brow furrowed in irritation as he opened his eyes. The room, dimly lit earlier, was now completely dark. He reached for the light switch on the wall. The sudden brightness revealed an empty room, with no trace of Sujira. It was as if everything that had happened between them had been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, it was real. That much was certain. Panlop hastily slipped on his boxers. "Jad, are you there?" He strode to the door, opening it and calling out for his trusted henchman. There he was, sitting comfortably, gnawing on grilled chicken. Jad turned abruptly when he felt someone's gaze on him. Realizing it was his boss, he quickly set down the chicken and practically sprinted over, forcing a sheepish smile. "Is there something wrong, boss?" he asked nervously, noting his boss's tense expression. "Where's the woman you brought here?" Jad's eyes widened in confusion, which only served to further irritate Panlop's already fraying patience. "Hey! Did a ghost seal your lips or what?" The scolding snapped Jad out of his daze. He quickly opened his mouth to reply before he could feel his boss's boot against his face. "She left. I paid her 3,000 baht, all settled," Jad reported, then furrowed his brows. "Wait. Did she steal something, boss?" Panlop's expression grew strange, his lips moving as though he'd swallowed a mouthful of salt. "No, she didn't steal anything. She stole my heart," he murmured dreamily. Jad strained his ears to catch the words. His effort interrupted when Panlop turned back abruptly. "Jad, get the car ready. I'm going home," Panlop ordered, disappearing back into the room and leaving his henchman dumbfounded. "Going home? Did I hear that right?" Jad muttered to himself in bewilderment. From the moment Sujira stepped into her bedroom that evening, she hadn't dared leave, not even to eat. A strange ache lingered beneath her navel, and vivid memories of the earlier events haunted her mind. The rough, calloused hands that had grasped her body sent a shiver down her spine. Without realizing it, she lightly ran her hands over her own skin. "Jira, are you in your room?" Her mother's voice called from downstairs, likely summoning her for dinner. "Yes, Mom. What is it?" she replied, pulling herself out of her reverie and standing from her old wooden chair. As she descended the stairs, she heard her father speaking with someone, his voice occasionally mingled with a familiar laugh. It was stepfather Cameron. This man never missed a chance to visit their house whenever he came to Bangkok, whether to demand repayment of debts or to make advances toward her. How annoying. Sujira sat quietly at the bottom of the stairs, straining her ears to catch the conversation. Look, I'm not in a rush for the 2 million, Cameron said to her father, who gave him a sheepish smile. But it's been a long time now. If it were anyone else, they'd have compounded the interest to nearly 10 million by now. Yeah, right. So kind, Sujira thought sarcastically. You know how slow business has been lately, especially with this outbreak, her father explained, trying to appeal to Cameron's understanding. I have no intention of defaulting on the debt. Cameron feigned a conflicted expression, glancing up toward the stairs where Sujira was hiding. If Jira agreed to be my wife, I wouldn't mind forgetting about the money entirely, he offered, smiling slyly. Again. Always the same ploy. Is Jira still upstairs, dear? Her father asked her mother, who stood beside him. Before her mother could call her again, Sujira decided to step down, wearing a haughty expression. Cameron greeted her with a smile, but she felt no warmth toward him. I brought you something from the south, Jira, he said, trying to win her over. But I don't like pickled satay beans, Cameron, she retorted cheekily. Her mother frowned at her, prompting Sujira to lower her gaze. When will you finally give me a chance, Jira? Cameron persisted. Sujira rolled her eyes and offered him a sarcastic smile. Did you come to collect the debt today, stepfather? Cameron, a man in his 40s, nodded. Yes. Would you like to go out? I can take you wherever you want, he suggested, desperate. And what would I get in return? A reduced debt? A diamond ring? She asked, feigning curiosity. Cameron looked taken aback, his face contorting into an awkward grimace. Her parents exchanged uneasy glances. Be my wife, and I'll reduce the debt for you. So stingy. Sujira regarded him with disdain, tilting her chin defiantly. No, thank you. I'll just pay the interest today, she said, pulling out 3,000 baht, the money she had received from Jod earlier. A shiver ran through her as she held the money. Where did you get that money, Jira? Her father asked suspiciously, aware of their current financial struggles. I earned it myself, Dad. Here, stepfather, take it, she replied, feeling increasingly uneasy about the money. Cameron accepted it begrudgingly, tucking it into his pocket with a disappointed look. Fine then. I'll be back another day, he said before leaving. The moment Cameron stepped out, her parents turned their full attention to interrogating her. Chapter 3. What kind of work are you doing, Jira? Her mother demanded. Yeah, what kind of work? Her father quickly chimed in. Sujira felt like crying. Today, she had set out to find Jod because she'd heard he had a boss who was handsome, rich, and a sucker for women. She had hoped her story would play out like a TV drama. The heroine meets a kind-hearted wealthy hero who cherishes her and spoils her endlessly, then proposes marriage and pays off her family's massive debts. Everything ends happily ever after. But reality? Far from it. Jod's boss was a rugged, lewd, filthy man with breath reeking of cigarettes. In the end, she got nothing but 3,000 baht from Jod and lost her innocence for such a pitiful price. She bit her lip unknowingly, suppressing her frustration. Jira! Answer me already! What are you daydreaming about? Her mother shouted, snapping her out of her thoughts. Sujira turned abruptly and forced a smile. I was helping a friend with their homework, and they paid me for it, she lied. Which friend? Her mother pressed, refusing to let it go. Ugh, Mom. I went out of my way to earn money for Dad and you, and now you're grilling me like I stole it. It hurts my feelings, she said, feigning annoyance before stomping upstairs, ignoring her mother's suspicious gaze. Panlop strode into his spacious home, crossing paths with his father, the Nap, who was just about to leave. The Nap stopped, looking at his son in surprise. Your home? It sounded like a question, but the tone was more sarcastic. Panlop nodded and flopped onto an expensive sofa, glancing at his father. Yes, as you can see, he replied cheekily. The Nap chuckled and sat on another sofa, facing his son. So, does this mean you're ready to work at the company, you troublemaker? Panlop hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, he said confidently, surprising his father. And why? The Nap teased, playing along. Because I want a wife, Panlop admitted bluntly. This time, The Nap leaned in closer, intrigued. You want a wife? What does that have to do with working at the company? Panlop's expression turned slightly annoyed as Sujira's face flashed through his mind. Because I'm serious about this one, Dad. Geez, why so many questions? He grumbled. The Nap nodded thoughtfully, leaning back. Now I'm curious to meet this woman, you rascal. Sounds like a miracle. It certainly is. Don't worry, I'll bring her to meet you soon, Panlop replied, standing and heading toward his room. Before he could leave, his father called out. And is she enough to make you stop your reckless ways, you troublemaker? Panlop paused, turning to reply with sincerity. It might sound crazy, but I'm really serious about her, Dad. He smiled, and his father returned the gesture. I'll be watching you, Panlop, very closely, the Nap said, laughing heartily. Panlop turned the knob and pushed open the door to his room. The lights turned on automatically as he stepped inside, scanning the room with a calm gaze. How long had it been since he lived recklessly, uncaring whether his parents worried themselves sick? His mother had left 5 years ago, escaping both his chaotic life and the monotony of his father, to live abroad. Where exactly, he didn't know. Oh, she had called him a couple of times, but she stopped after one particularly unpleasant call when he'd answered while in the company of a prostitute. The memory of that conversation was utterly shameful. Panlop chuckled bitterly at the thought. The sound of soft footsteps caught his attention, and he turned sharply to see Cannon, a young woman he had been involved with, standing shyly by the door. Before he realized it, Cannon was already pressing herself against his chest. Panlop closed his eyes, wearing a contented expression. She knew exactly how to please him. The two embraced, exchanging kisses and touches. But just as things began to heat up, an image of Sujira flashed in his mind. Ridiculous! Yet his mood soured instantly. Cannon noticed his change in demeanor. What's wrong? She asked, visibly displeased. Panlop gently pushed her away. Nothing. I've just found a woman I truly like, he said bluntly, unbothered by her reaction. Cannon looked stunned, but knowing his straightforward nature, she understood that when he spoke like this, he meant it. Tears welled up in her eyes. Why are you crying, Cannon? Panlop asked, frowning. She made a move to embrace him again, but he stepped back, leaving her stunned and silencing her sobs. There was no point in continuing this. I'd really like to know who she is, the one who's captured your heart so completely, she said bitterly, her voice laced with jealousy. Until now, she had always been his favorite partner, even when he rarely stayed home. Don't be dramatic, Cannon. I know you've offered yourself to others, Panlop retorted, cutting her off with his sharp tongue. Cannon glared at him before standing to adjust her skirt. As she prepared to leave, she threw one last remark over her shoulder. Don't come crawling back to me, Panlop. Then we'll see who's truly better. She stormed out in a huff. Panlop lay back, smiling to himself at her parting words. She had a point. There was no one more thrilling than her. But when it came to someone who truly mattered, it wasn't about that. True connection came from the heart. He chuckled, pleased with his own thoughts, and began fantasizing about visiting Sujira tomorrow. Whatever her reasons for approaching him that day, money or something else, she shouldn't even think about escaping a man like Panlop. Not Sujira. Chapter 4. A prominent dietary supplement import company, located on the outskirts of the city, was running like any other day. But today, the secretary nearly clutched her chest in shock when Mr. the Nap entered with someone trailing closely behind him. Mr. Panlop, she exclaimed, looking around frantically for someone to share the excitement of this morning's bombshell news. Who didn't know about Panlop, the president's scandalous son? His name was synonymous with controversy. Bar fights in nightclubs. Wild sex parties. Oh, the list could go on and on. One could spend an entire day recounting his exploits. Sam, Mr. the Nap called out as he approached the meeting room. Sam, the secretary, immediately curtsied with practiced politeness. Yes, Mr. President, she replied sweetly. Mr. Panlop will be attending the meeting today. Prepare an extra seat for him. Yes, sir. Oh, Sam's heart felt like it might burst. Panlop attending a meeting? Was this reality or some bizarre dream? How old was he now? Oh right, 30. Perhaps fate was rolling out something extraordinary this time. She hurriedly carried out her boss's instructions and naturally, spread the news to her colleagues. The entire company would be buzzing about this for sure. Inside the meeting room, the 8 major shareholders of the company had already taken their seats. When Panlop entered, whispers immediately began circulating. But the man walked in casually, unfazed. He wasn't naive. He knew exactly how people viewed him. That wasn't his concern. Heh. Well, Mr. Panlop, is that really you? Wow, what a fantastic surprise today, exclaimed Chache, greeting him with enthusiasm. Panlop gave a bored look but eventually mimicked the excitement. Ah, Chai, he replied, playing along with the theatrics. The two exchanged smiles, and Chache continued. Let's grab a coffee after the meeting, Panlop. It's been ages since we've had a chat. Asterisk as if that ever happened, you fool. You pompous prig. Asterisk. Sure. I'll treat, Panlop replied with a bright smile that was nothing but a facade. The meeting proceeded smoothly. Although Panlop barely understood the topics discussed, being the president's son meant that wasn't an issue at all. Once the meeting concluded, Panlop dragged his feet to the car. Finally, the tedious charade of the day was over. It was time to visit his beloved. Today, he drove himself, having sent Jod to investigate the whereabouts of his heart's desire. Finding her wasn't difficult. Her family had run a noodle shop for generations, dating back to her grandfather's era. Her family was of Chinese descent, though the ties to their heritage had grown faint over the years. They were currently struggling financially due to a debt owed to a southern loan shark who lent money to vendors at exorbitant interest rates, amassing wealth rapidly. Rumor had it that this widowed loan shark was courting his Sujira. Panlop clenched his jaw tightly. No one would take her from him. She was already his wife. He wouldn't let anyone snatch her away. Chapter 5. He parked his car in front of an old 2-story wooden house. The ground floor was open, serving as a noodle shop and tea house. The young man scanned the small shop, his eyes searching eagerly for the woman his heart longed to see. There she was. She was stepping in to take over from her father, who was now sitting in a rocking chair by the door, fanning himself. The shop wasn't busy, just 2 customers, a sign of how slow business had become. Oh, Jira, he thought, sighing inwardly. Quickly, he put on his tinted glasses and stepped out of the car, striding purposefully into the shop. Sujira, who was blanching morning glory and noodles, turned and froze in surprise when she saw him. Welcome. What can I get for you? She asked, though her voice faltered slightly. Small noodles, no vegetables, just meatballs, he replied sweetly. Sujira gulped and nodded, turning back to prepare the noodles, her heart pounding. Asterisk, why is he here? It's really him. Oh no, Jira, he's found you. Asterisk. Her mind raced with panic, so much so that she accidentally added seasoning to the broth twice. Jira, you've already put MSG in twice, her father scolded from his chair. The customers chuckled at her flustered state. Jira, are you trying to make me go bald? Teased one of the men, who had thinning hair and a shiny bald spot. Sujira forced a smile, her composure shaken by his presence. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Panlop glaring at the customer. His expression clearly displeased. Was he jealous? She wondered, shaking her head at the absurdity. Why would he be jealous? She quickly poured broth over the noodles, finishing 2 bowls, and brought them to the customers, who grinned at her mischievously. Ah, smells great, Jira's noodles, one of them joked, pretending to sniff her hand. Panlop couldn't take it anymore. He removed his glasses and stood abruptly. Excuse me, I'm hungry. Is my order ready yet? He called out gruffly. Sujira quickly set down the bowls and rushed back to her station. The 2 customers glared at Panlop but avoided eye contact when he stared them down with his intimidating gaze. Panlop wasn't one to back down from a confrontation. When Sujira brought his bowl of noodles to the table, her movements stiff and tense, he leaned in and whispered, "Come see me this evening. I need to talk to you." Her eyes widened, but she quickly masked her reaction and returned to making noodles for new customers. Panlop ate his noodles while watching her, feeling utterly content. He tried smiling at her, but she avoided looking at him entirely. I'll remember this, my dear Jira, he thought, amused and smitten. As he finished the last drop of broth, sweat dripped down his face. He had eaten every last bite, wanting to show his appreciation for her cooking. He tugged at his shirt collar to cool off. The shop was unbearably stuffy without proper ventilation. Once she's mine, I'll renovate this place into an air-conditioned, upscale noodle shop, he thought, grinning to himself. Before leaving, he ordered 10 more portions to go, much to her parents' delight. Winning over future in-laws sure feels good, he mused. But Sujira's expression? Sour as ever. She glared at him as if willing him to leave as quickly as possible. Asterisk, just you wait, my dear. Tonight, you won't escape. Asterisk. Come back any time, her mother said cheerfully, beaming at him. Oh, I'll be back, he thought, smiling inwardly. Not just once. I'll be a permanent fixture at this shop, eating your daughter's noodles forever. As he left, carrying the bags of noodles, he longed for one sweet smile from his beloved. But alas, none came. So cold-hearted, he thought with a chuckle. He got into his car, sending her an exaggerated air kiss before driving away. Sujira, chopping roast duck distractedly, seemed lost in her thoughts. See you tonight, my love, he murmured to himself with a grin. Chapter 6. It was nearly evening, and Sujira was cleaning up the shop, her mind unsettled. That brute would surely come after her if she didn't meet him as promised. Asterisk, why did I do this, Jira? Why? One mistake, and my life is ruined forever. Asterisk. BZZ, BZZ. Her old phone vibrated on the table near her father, startling her. Jira! Your phone is ringing. Come answer it, her father called out. Seeing her daughter frozen in place, her mother, who was peeling garlic, motioned to pick it up instead. Sujira quickly dropped the broom and rushed to grab it. The number was unlisted. Her heart raced, and her eyes darted around nervously as she carried the phone to the back to answer. Who's speaking? She asked cautiously after picking up. Such a sweet voice, Jira. It warms my heart, came a dreamy voice from the other end. Sujira grimaced, remembering his cigarette-smelling breath, and felt the urge to gag. Why so quiet? Don't you miss me? He asked, his tone feigning hurt when she didn't reply. She stayed silent, unsure of what to say, which made him chuckle mischievously. If you don't talk, I'll come find you at the shop. And I'll tell your father, Anne. Don't you dare, she interrupted sharply. Panlop laughed, pleased by her reaction, and continued sweet-talking her. Come see me, my love. No, she replied, the thought alone sending chills down her spine. Fine. Then I'll come to you. You have exactly 20 minutes to show up. If you don't, be prepared to explain everything to your parents, he threatened before abruptly hanging up. Sujira's face went pale. Disaster had arrived. She let out a long, shaky sigh. What's wrong, Jira? Who was that on the phone? Was it Cameron, the stepfather? Her mother asked rapidly. The mention of Cameron made Sujira's head throb. How many lifetimes will it take to pay off that debt? And now, there was another problem. A monster she had created with her own hands, stalking her relentlessly. Mom, I need to run an errand. A friend wants me to stop by their house, she said loudly. Her mother squinted at her suspiciously. Which friend, Jira? Why is she so nosy? Sujira thought irritably before answering. You don't know them, Mom. They just need help with some homework. Maybe I'll earn a little money to pay off Cameron's interest. Homework. Even saying it sounded terrifying. Not waiting for further questions, Sujira hurried upstairs to change, her mind scattered. She applied a soft sakura-colored lipstick. Wait, why am I putting on lipstick? She sighed at her own absent-mindedness, grabbing a small purse that contained nothing but loose change. Day by day, her family's financial situation worsened. That stingy old loan shark never stopped hounding them. If he weren't so miserly, she might have agreed to marry him by now. But his stinginess was the problem. Ugh, if marrying him would cancel the debt, he'd probably only knock off a few tens of thousands. If she were lucky, maybe 100,000. The rest of her life would be spent as either his housemaid or his cook. Lost in thought, she barely noticed when she arrived at the shabby, dilapidated house. She couldn't believe she'd trusted Jod's claim that his boss was rich. If he were truly wealthy, the room wouldn't be so filthy and smelly. But earlier, he'd driven a luxury car to the noodle shop. She scanned for the car he'd used that afternoon but didn't see it anywhere. He probably borrowed it to show off. No way he can afford it himself. Resolving herself, she knocked on the door, her heart pounding as she braced for the dark, musty room inside, like a pig awaiting slaughter. Chapter 7. Knock. 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 Barely 10 minutes after she knocked, hurried footsteps approached the door, like a cat ready to pounce on its prey. When the door opened, he appeared with a heart-melting smile. "Sujira, my dear." His sweet-talking tone was enough to make her sigh in irritation. Before she could react, Panlop wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her inside and slamming the door shut with a loud bang. "Welcome to our love nest, Sujira," he said in a sickeningly sweet voice. Asterisk love nest? More like a rat hole, asterisk, she thought, rolling her eyes. But then something caught her attention. A faint pleasant fragrance in the room. Looking around, she noticed that the space looked completely transformed, as if he had magically refurbished it just for her. The rose-colored bedsheets were particularly jarring. She stared at them in horror. The room was now spotless, nothing like the grimy mess she had stepped into the last time. Panlop beamed with pride as he noticed her reaction to the room. "Well, do you like it?" "I did some digging and found out. You love pink," he said in a syrupy tone. She scowled at him. "So what?" "It has nothing to do with me," she snapped defiantly. Panlop responded by pulling her close and crushing her lips in a heated kiss, leaving her weak and trembling. When he pulled back, he looked at her with a playful, scolding expression, as though she were a naughty child. "Next time speak nicely, my love. If you're rude, I'll have to punish you," he teased, now referring to himself as Big Brother in a patronizing tone. She stared at him, wide-eyed, fearing more punishment. "You're adorable," he said with a grin. Adorable? Yesterday, he had said she had nothing going for her except her backside. What a joke. "Why did you call me here? What do you want to say to me?" she asked bluntly, trying to steer his attention away from her face. "Nothing, really. I just missed you," he replied with those same longing eyes. "Then I'll leave," she said, making a move toward the door. But Panlop grabbed her, holding her tightly and burying his face in the crook of her neck with a hunger that made her shiver. "Don't go!" She tried to resist, even as her body betrayed her, responding to his touch. Panlop silenced her protests with another deep kiss, his warm lips and tongue seeking hers. Strange, she thought, feeling herself getting lost in the moment. Today, he doesn't smell of cigarettes. It made the experience less revolting. Suddenly, she snapped back to her senses and pulled away, trying to free herself from his iron grip. 30,000, she blurted out. Panlop blinked, confused. "What's that?" 30,000 kisses, he teased. She rolled her eyes at him. "I mean, you need to pay me 30,000 baht. If she was going to give herself to him, she might as well ask for compensation. "Not very loving of you to demand 30,000 from your husband," he said, his tone sharp. "Well, are you unwilling or just unable to pay?" she shot back, her tone laced with contempt. Panlop stared at her, trying to decipher her expression. "What do you need the money for, Sujira?" he asked, absent-mindedly playing with a strand of her hair. "I need it to pay off debts. My family is drowning in them. If you don't give it to me, I'll just be giving myself to you for free," she said bitterly, her voice trembling as if she might cry. "Is that why you came to me yesterday?" he asked, his tone turning serious. When she nodded, he flicked her forehead in irritation. "Ouch! Why did you do that?" she complained, glaring at him. "I'm mad at you, Sujira. How could you put yourself in such danger? If it hadn't been me yesterday, think about what could have happened to you. You might not have even made it out alive," he scolded, clearly upset. She cast a sideways glance at him. "And this is supposed to be better? Don't look at me like that. Don't ever do something like that again," he said firmly. Sujira tried to get up to leave. "Where are you going?" he asked curtly. "Home. What else?" "I still don't have enough money to pay off the interest," she replied. "How much?" "What?" she asked, confused by his sudden question. "Tell me how much the debt is," he pressed, his voice demanding. 2 million baht, Mr. Panlop, she said, holding out her hand mockingly. He swatted her hand away playfully. "Not today, but tomorrow I'll bring it," he said with conviction. Sujira looked unimpressed. "So you plan to get me for free tonight, huh?" "Sujira, don't be disrespectful," he warned. Her mouth snapped shut involuntarily. Asterisk, why am I listening to him like this? I hate myself for it. Asterisk. Sujira, he murmured, pulling her into another embrace and peppering her cheeks with affectionate kisses. She mumbled, her lips pursed like a soap opera heroine. I'm going to ask your parents for your hand in marriage, he whispered softly. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. Asterisk, oh please. Like I'd believe that. Asterisk. But why did her heart flutter at the thought? Why did it feel nice when he held her, kissed her, and spoke to her so tenderly? Asterisk, oh wait. He didn't actually say he loved me. Asterisk, she reminded herself. Before you leave, let me savor you a little, he said, guiding her toward the rose-colored bed. Don't you want to try lying on the new sheets? He asked, his tone laced with desire. Panlop was always lustful when he was with this petite woman. Sujira felt light-headed, as if she were coming down with something. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she drifted off without realizing it. Chapter 8. On a soft plush bed, a young man and woman lay entwined in each other's arms, their faces peaceful as if lost in a perfect dream. Neither showed any signs of waking, until the woman's old phone began vibrating on the nearby table. Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. It buzzed 3 or 4 times, but its owner remained blissfully asleep. Sujira, wake up. Your father's calling, Panlop said, his voice urgent, though his demeanor seemed far more relaxed. Sujira bolted upright, her hair a tousled mess. What did you say? She asked, glancing nervously around the room. Your father called, he repeated softly, handing her the phone. Sujira gulped as she took it, her eyes fixed not on the caller ID, but on the clock. Asterisk 9:15 a.m. Asterisk. Her hand slackened, and the phone fell onto the bed as she stared in shock, her mouth agape like a fish out of water. What? It's morning already? Panlop shook his head and corrected her with a teasing grin. No, it's late morning. Their eyes met. His gaze was full of amusement, but hers was frantic. Finally, tears began streaming down her face. Hick. Dad's going to kill me. Aff, she wailed, her voice escalating as she panicked. Sujira, calm down. I'll go with you, Panlop said, trying to soothe her. But his words only made her scream louder. Go with me? Are you crazy? If you come along, Mom and Dad will kill me for sure. This is all your fault, she accused, glaring at him furiously. Hey, I can't help it. I'm in love, he muttered sheepishly, as though genuinely remorseful. Asterisk, in love? Did I hear that right? Asterisk, she thought, momentarily stunned. Had this brute just confessed his love? Her sobbing quieted slightly, but her tears continued to fall. Panlop leaned closer, resting his head on her shoulder and whispering softly. Do you trust me, Sujira? She wanted to punch him in the face, but for some reason, she nodded meekly instead. Her heart betrayed her once again. Asterisk, but so what? Things have already gone too far, asterisk, she thought bitterly. What are you going to do, Mr. Panlop? She asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Call me Big Brother first, and I'll tell you. And you'll have to keep calling me that, he bargained playfully, his voice dripping with affection. Fine, Big Brother, she relented, eager to hear his plan. I'm going to meet your parents, kneel before them, and ask for your hand in marriage, he declared. You're going to confess? Sujira gasped, her voice rising in alarm. He nodded solemnly, locking eyes with her. She opened her mouth to protest, but a voice deep inside urged her to trust him, just this once. After showering and dressing, Sujira chose to wear yesterday's clothes, refusing Panlop's offer of his casual t-shirts and jeans. Sitting in the car, he reached out to hold her cold, trembling hand in an attempt to calm her nerves. Their eyes met, and she saw a tender warmth in his gaze that made her heart waver. She felt an inexplicable sense of comfort. If only he could really pay off Dad and Mom's debts, everything would be perfect, she thought wistfully. He promised to bring the money, but where is it? The thought made her snap her head away, turning to look at the road instead. Panlop noticed her sudden shift but focused on driving without comment. Her house wasn't far, and before long they arrived. He parked across the street and watched as Sujira's chest rose and fell with anxious breaths. Hey, she called, quickly changing her tone when he glanced at her with a warning look. Big Brother, could you wait here? I want to check the situation first. In case we don't need to confess anything. Her pleading tone made him relent. All right. I need to make a call anyway. But if things go south, I'll come in, he said. Sujira nodded, and Panlop leaned over to plant a gentle kiss on her forehead before she stepped out of the car. Closing the door behind her, she carefully crossed the quiet street to her house. The shop was closed today, and the stillness of the house made her feel like she might collapse from the weight of her dread. The creak of the folding wooden door startled her as her mother stepped out, her gaze fixed on Sujira. "Jira, where were you all night?" her mother demanded loudly. Without thinking, Sujira rushed forward and hugged her tightly. "Please don't hit me, Mom. I stayed over at a friend's house," she lied, trembling with fear. To her surprise, her mother hugged her back. "Jira," her mother said softly, her voice unusually heavy. Sujira pulled back to look at her mother's face, noticing the sadness in her eyes. "Your father was taken to the hospital this morning," her mother said. Sujira felt her knees go weak, her eyes brimming with tears as she stammered. "What happened to him, Mom?" "He fell. And with you not here, I had to call an ambulance to take him," her mother explained, her voice tinged with sorrow. Sujira listened in anguish. Their old truck, used for buying supplies, was something only she and her father could drive. With him unwell, her mother must have been terrified. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't answer the phone this morning," she cried, embracing her mother tightly. "You meant well, trying to earn money for us to pay off the debt." "Don't blame yourself, Jira," her mother said, patting her back as tears welled in her own eyes. Poverty shows no mercy. And neither does debt. "Mom, I'll marry Cameron to settle the debt," she said, her voice heavy with resignation. Her mother gasped, but the person behind her was even more shocked. "Absolutely not." The voice wasn't her mother's, it was Panlop's. He glared at her, his expression intense. Both Sujira and her mother turned toward him in surprise. "Jira, you promised me," he said, his tone stern. "Who is this Jira?" her mother asked, her suspicion growing. Sujira glanced nervously at her mother before replying in a small voice. "Just someone I know, Mom." When his beloved refused to acknowledge him properly, Panlop stepped forward to stand beside her. He raised his hands in a respectful greeting. "Hello, ma'am. I'm here to ask for Jira's hand in marriage." "We're very much in love," he declared. Sujira felt her world crumble before her eyes. She blacked out, her body collapsing into darkness, as silence enveloped everything. Chapter 9. Time passed. Sujira could hear faint voices, like someone speaking on the phone. The voice was familiar. She struggled to open her heavy eyelids, realizing she was lying in the living room on her father's old wooden daybed, usually used for afternoon naps. The person holding the phone to their ear, speaking animatedly, was none other than Panlop, the reckless brute who had turned her world upside down. She glared at his back in frustration. Just as he finished his call, he turned and caught her staring at him. "Jira, how are you feeling?" he asked, his voice full of the same concern as before. But she turned her face away and lay down with her back to him, sulking. Panlop walked over and sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I called Jod to take your mother to the hospital. They left about 10 minutes ago," he informed her gently. "Is he acting like a son-in-law already?" she thought irritably, sitting up to face him. "I'm going to marry my creditor," she declared, her tone sharp. "That's not happening, Jira." "Your mother has already accepted me as her son-in-law," he replied, shaking his head with a victorious grin. "But I have debts. How will you, Big Brother, pay them?" she asked mockingly. "You underestimate me, don't you?" "I'll find a way," he replied, his voice tinged with hurt. He loved her so deeply, yet she had no faith in him. He had worked hard to turn his life around, returning to work, changing nearly everything overnight, and yet she still doubted him. Finally, he spoke in a steady tone. "Rest for now, Jira. Your mother should be back in a few hours." Panlop stood, and Sujira felt a pang of anxiety. "Where are you going?" she blurted out. He smiled at her. "I'm heading home. I have some business to take care of. Rest well, my dear." He lightly touched her head before leaving. She watched him go, a strange sense of loneliness washing over her. He had infiltrated her heart so quickly, leaving her on the verge of tears as he walked away. At Suvarnabhumi Airport, in the departures terminal, Jeremy, or Joyce, a high-society socialite, walked confidently with her designer luggage in tow. Passengers nearby couldn't help but admire her stunning charm and impeccable fashion sense. She stopped and craned her elegant neck, scanning the crowd for the person she was meeting. Before long, a man who could only be described as her ideal, handsome and striking, came running toward her. "Over here, Lop," she called, raising her hand adorned with a sparkling designer bracelet. Panlop slowed his hurried steps and approached her casually. As soon as he was within reach, Jeremy threw her arms around him and kissed him on both cheeks in an overly familiar manner, typical of someone who had lived abroad for years. After hearing that her wayward son had returned to work and turned over a new leaf, Panlop's mother had sent Jeremy back to Thailand to fulfill their engagement. What was Mom thinking? So old-fashioned. Panlop thought. She's lived abroad for so long, yet still clings to these outdated notions. He allowed Jeremy to hug, kiss, and even grope him until she was satisfied. "I've missed you so much," she cooed, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "Miss me?" He thought wryly. She had gone abroad with her family when they were children and had only played together once. Still, he had to admit that she was adaptable. Perhaps too much so. As she slipped her hand inside his shirt flirtatiously, she gave him a seductive look. "Aren't you hungry, Joyce?" he asked, amused. Her gaze grew even hungrier, but not for food. "Hungry for something else," she replied shamelessly. "Okay. Let's go eat something else, then." "I know plenty of great places," he said, brushing off her remark and taking her hand off his shirt to hold her luggage instead. He gestured for her to walk ahead. Jeremy gave him a sidelong glance but complied. "Don't let your guard down, Panlop," she thought. I'll devour you before you even realize it. Just watch. Jeremy always gets what she wants. Chapter 10. Delicate hands flipped garlic in a sizzling pan absent-mindedly. Her mother had gone to the hospital again, and her father was still weak, though thankfully it wasn't anything serious, just the typical ailments of old age. Her father and mother had waited 12 years before having her. When they got married, her father had been nearly 40. Now, he was edging closer to the end of his life. Just thinking about it made her feel lonely. She wanted to go to the hospital too, but there'd be no one to run the noodle shop, and they didn't have any money to spare either. Her thoughts wandered to him, that brute. Since he left the other day, he hadn't come back. Jod, who had dropped her mother off at the hospital the previous evening, had brought along 2 large bags of groceries, saying his boss had sent them. At that moment, her heart had swelled with joy. But now, it was deflated once again. Why would someone like him care about a simple noodle shop girl like me? To him, she was just a fleeting amusement, a novelty. Why would he take her seriously? Yesterday, curiosity had gotten the better of her, and she'd looked into Panlop's background. She was shocked to learn he was incredibly wealthy, owning 5 companies in Thailand. His father was a politician, and his mother had moved abroad when he was a teenager. He had lived a reckless life, largely ignored by his father, who indulged him with money but little else. Daydreaming about Big Brother, are we? The voice of Cameron, her stepfather, interrupted her thoughts. He stood clutching his signature large bag. Startled, Sujira quickly turned off the gas stove and scooped the garlic into a strainer to drain the oil. "When did you arrive, Cameron?" "I didn't hear your car," she said, walking over and sitting down, her nerves on edge. He had probably come to collect the interest on her family's debt, but there was barely 2,000 baht in the house. Giving it to him would leave them with nothing to visit her father in the hospital. "I parked in the usual spot," he said, motioning toward the gas station nearby. "I walked over because there's no parking here. If you agree to marry me, I'll build you a garage," he added with his usual persuasion. Cameron sat close to her, surprised that she wasn't snapping at him as usual. Instead, she seemed subdued, fueling his confidence. "Sujira!" He took her hand in his expression sickly sweet. Snapped out of her daze, Sujira quickly pulled her hand away, her face a mixture of annoyance and discomfort. Cameron's face darkened as he glared at her. "I came to collect the interest. Hurry and get it," he demanded. She forced a smile, trying to mask her panic. "Cameron, can I delay it just a little longer?" she pleaded, tears threatening to spill. She hated being in debt, hated being poor, And for some inexplicable reason, she now hated Panlop too, for promising to help her with the debt and then disappearing. Asterisk, it was all just empty words. He just wanted to sleep with me, that's all. Asterisk. Delay. Cameron's face twisted in irritation. You're always delaying. The sharpness of his words made her hands tremble, and she didn't know what to do. I don't know where else to get the money, she admitted, her voice breaking. Inwardly, she wanted to scream, I can't take this anymore. Before Cameron could mock her further, Panlop appeared, holding a thick brown envelope. I heard someone around here is in need of money. Is that true, Cameron? Panlop strode into the shop confidently, his tone mocking. Sujira felt a wave of relief and joy. Finally he had come. Cameron scowled in annoyance. Hello, Mr. Panlop. I trust you're doing well. It turned out they already knew each other. Panlop nodded slightly. Very well, thank you. I've noticed you visit often, Cameron, but I've never felt like inviting you to dinner, he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Cameron shrugged, unfazed by the jab. How much is the debt, Jira? Panlop asked, turning to Sujira, who was still processing his sudden arrival. 2 million baht, not including interest, she replied. Panlop nodded and handed the envelope to Cameron. Cameron took it, clearly surprised. Count it carefully, Cameron. I'll stand right here and wait. Let me know when it's all accounted for, Panlop said coolly. Cameron opened the envelope and began counting the money meticulously, going through it 2 or 3 times. As he counted, Panlop's voice filled the room. How about waiving the interest, Cameron? I've given you the full 2 million. Show a little mercy to your debtors. Cameron tied up the remaining money and put it back into the envelope, handing it to Panlop with a neutral expression. I was already going to waive the interest. But don't look so proud of yourself. Sure, the debt is paid off today, but who's to say there won't be more debts tomorrow? He directed his final remark pointedly at Sujira. Chapter 11. Cameron's words were true. No matter how hard her family worked, they seemed to always accumulate more debt year after year. As Cameron stepped out of the shop, he muttered to Sujira. I thought you held yourself above others, but you've stooped lower than anyone else. What did you do to make Mr. Panlop pay off your debts? It was a rhetorical question, not needing an answer. Sujira's face fell as she reflected on his words. He was right about everything. After Cameron left, Panlop stepped closer to her. What did he say to you just now? He asked, his tone laced with jealousy. Ever since he had met her, his heart had been in turmoil. From being indifferent, he had transformed into a possessive husband-in-waiting. Sujira looked at him, then gave a small grateful smile. Thank you so much for helping us today. But Cameron was right. I probably can't escape being in debt again in the future, she said, her head bowed in sadness. What else can I do? I only have a basic GED certificate. Selling noodles is all I can do, she added bitterly. But Panlop shook his head. That's not true. You'll be my lawful wife soon enough. Tomorrow, we'll visit my father to seek his blessing, he declared. Her heart swelled unexpectedly. She raised her hands to cover her mouth, unable to believe what she was hearing. Hick! She tried to suppress a sob, but the tears threatened to spill over. Could she really have someone to take care of her now? Panlop pulled her into a protective embrace, holding her tightly. I understand how you feel, Jira. From now on, you'll never feel alone again. I promise, he said softly. Sujira said nothing, because she had come to trust this man completely, with her whole heart. By the time he left, the shop had closed for the day. Their emotions had carried them away, and they had spent the afternoon together in her room, lost in each other once again. They were both utterly exhausted by the time they were done, her body sore all over. Still, Panlop handed her the remaining money from the envelope, telling her to use it as she saw fit. She decided to fill up the old truck's gas tank and drive it to visit her father at the hospital. Her father looked much better and smiled warmly when he saw her arrive. Jira, why aren't you selling noodles? And how did you get here? Don't tell me you drove the truck. Her father clearly worried about wasting gas, as the old truck consumed a lot of fuel. Sujira nodded sheepishly, prompting her father to throw an arm over his face dramatically. Aya! You never think things through. One day, you're going to bring ruin upon yourself, Jira, he scolded. Despite his grumbling, her mother smiled at her husband and spoke cheerfully. Jira's getting married soon, you know. Her fiancé said he'll renovate the shop for us. Her father turned to Sujira, who smiled bashfully. He seemed about to say something but decided to stay quiet. What kind of man is he? And how can you be sure he's sincere, Jira? Her father finally asked. He helped pay off all our debts, Dad. We don't owe Cameron anything anymore, she said, her voice filled with joy. Her father and mother exchanged looks of disbelief and elation. Dear, we're debt-free now. I can finally sleep soundly, her mother exclaimed, her body trembling with relief. Sujira watched her mother, her heart aching with guilt. Oh, Mom. I've been such a useless daughter. Her father nodded slowly. Can you bring him to meet me, Jira? I'd like to thank him myself. Sujira noticed the tears welling in her father's eyes, and it made her heart sink. She tried to keep her smile bright. Let's wait until you're back home first, Dad. Then I'll have him come to hear your thanks. Even as she spoke, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Oh, love. So hard to understand. Sometimes, it comes unexpectedly, without any preparation. Even when we fear the uncertainty of the future, we willingly surrender to experience the bittersweet taste of love again and again. Chapter 12. Panlop was seated at the dining table in his grand home. At the head of the table sat Mr. the Nap, and across from him was Jeremy, who couldn't seem to stop staring at Panlop with an inviting smile. In the past, he wouldn't have hesitated to accept such obvious advances. But now, his heart and body belonged entirely to another woman. Ahem. The man at the head of the table broke the tense atmosphere, and Panlop couldn't help but smile at his father knowingly. Ah, Dad, you're onto her games, aren't you? Jeremy turned toward the older man, frowning in confusion. Is something caught in your throat, Uncle? He laughed awkwardly, quickly dismissing her concern. No, Joyce, just a little dry throat, he replied. At his response, Jeremy shifted her gaze to Cannon, who was standing by the wall, ready to assist the family as usual. You. Pour some water for Uncle already. What are you standing there for like a statue? She commanded imperiously. The abruptness of her tone made everyone pause in discomfort. This household wasn't accustomed to such high-handed behavior. Cannon glanced at Panlop, annoyed that he said nothing to defend her and allowed Jeremy to boss her around. She reluctantly moved to pour the water, but Mr. the Nap waved her off with a kind smile. No need, Cannon. You may go do something else, he said. This is why Mr. the Nap is respected in this house, Cannon thought. But Miss Jeremy? She doesn't have an ounce of what it takes to belong here. If Panlop did end up marrying Jeremy, Cannon figured she might have to resign sooner rather than later. Jeremy glared at Cannon, dissatisfied. She noticed how Cannon seemed to look at Panlop with reverence and suspected there was more between them than met the eye. Those two are definitely involved, she thought, her suspicions fueled by jealousy. If she was to stay here, she would need to find a way to get Cannon out of the picture. The tension between the two women filled the air, while the father and son exchanged uneasy glances, oblivious to the brewing rivalry. Dinner that evening was anything but pleasant. After the meal, Panlop excused himself and retreated to his bedroom. He was contemplating a visit to Sujira's house when a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Oh, Panlop, he thought nervously. Dangerous women incoming. To his relief, it was Cannon, not Jeremy. He smiled at her as she entered. Does this mean you don't like your fiancé either, Mr. Panlop? Cannon teased, seeing through him easily. He rolled his eyes at his former lover, who seemed to know him too well. Without responding, he turned to pack his clothes into a bag. Are you heading out for the night? She asked. He nodded. Yes. Why, Cannon? Is there something you need? He asked, his tone gentle, as he still felt a sense of care for her. Is Jod going with you? Her question made him pause. He looked at her curiously. You and Jod? He asked, lowering his gaze with mock suspicion, causing Cannon to blush. Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Panlop. I just need his help with something, she replied, giving him a playful glare. Ridiculous. Sure, she had been easygoing, but she wasn't that easy. All right. I'll leave him here to help you. But won't you tell me what you need him for? He asked, zipping up his bag and preparing to leave. Do you not like Miss Jeremy? She suddenly asked again. Panlop furrowed his brow, wondering what was going through her mind. Women are so hard to understand. Wouldn't you find it strange to be forced into an engagement out of nowhere? Would you agree to something like that, Canon? He shot back sarcastically. Canon smirked, satisfied. I prefer my freedom. I take what I like and leave what I don't. If you don't like Miss Jeremy, that's good enough for me, she said with a grin before skipping out of the room. Panlop watched her leave, puzzled, but decided not to dwell on it. She probably doesn't like Jeremy either. Maybe it's because Jeremy bossed her around at dinner. It wasn't worth thinking about, especially when his mind was preoccupied with one name. Jira. That morning, he and Sujira had reignited their passion in bed, and he couldn't help but be impressed by her newfound confidence. She had improved so much that he couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" He wanted to see her again, but he didn't want to impose on her mother. Patience. Panlop. Once you're married, you can have her 4 times a day if you want, he thought to himself, grinning wickedly at the idea. With that, he slung his bag over his shoulder and left the room. Chapter 13. Panlop lay lazily in bed, savoring his relaxed morning. He planned to pick up Sujira's father from the hospital later, formally introduce himself to her family, and then take her to meet his own father. As for Jeremy, he would finally have to talk to his mother and put an end to that arrangement. You can't love someone just because they're good for you. Love doesn't work that way, he thought, stifling a laugh at his mother's misguided plans. Ding. 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 The loud ringtone from his phone jolted him out of his daydream. Groaning, he groped for the phone and glanced at the screen. His mother's name flashed across it. Speak of the devil, he thought. Hello, Mother. What? Are you sure? Fine, I'll come back, he said, hanging up with a groan. Canon. What have you done now? He quickly called Sujira, apologizing that he wouldn't be able to pick up her father today. Her voice betrayed her annoyance, but he soothed her with promises to visit the next day as soon as his business was sorted. The situation was chaotic. His mother was furious and flying back to Thailand today. The reason? Last night, Jeremy had gone into his room for some unknown reason, and by morning, she was found naked, alongside Jod, who was equally unclothed. Jeremy claimed Jod had assaulted her, but Panlop was certain Jod was being framed. The mastermind? None other than Canon. Canon, what were you thinking? Just yesterday, he had been planning to talk to his mother about everything calmly. Now, it was an uncontrollable mess. He quickly threw on some clothes and bolted to his car, driving home as if his life depended on it. When he arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. Jod sat in the corner, a bright red handprint on his cheek. He looked terrified, probably worried about getting another beating. Canon was nowhere to be seen. At the center of the storm were his father, looking flustered, and Jeremy, who was sitting next to a large suitcase, ready to leave. As soon as Jeremy saw him, she pouted and looked ready to burst into tears. Panlop, where were you last night? Look at what your subordinate did to me, she exclaimed, pointing at Jod, who looked on the verge of tears himself. Joyce, why were you in my room last night? Panlop asked coldly, his expression stern. Jeremy's face turned pale at his sharp tone. I went to talk to you about something, but that man. He attacked me. Hick! She sobbed dramatically, though her tears were more out of fear of Panlop's intense demeanor than genuine distress. So this is what people mean by feral Panlop. Nobody warned me he could be this intimidating. Why didn't you scream for help? He pressed, his voice firm but laced with skepticism. Jeremy turned her head away, sniffling, and glanced at Mr. the Nap, who flinched under her gaze. Look at your son, Uncle. He's accusing me of being easy, of willingly going into that room, she said, her voice trembling with indignation. Then she turned back to Panlop, her eyes blazing. Why don't you ask him why he was on your bed? She demanded, pointing at Jod as if her finger could bore into him. Jod gulped audibly, looking utterly petrified. I had him guarding my room. That's standard procedure. So whatever happened was not Jod's fault. If something was brought to the bed, anyone would take it. Wouldn't you agree, Joyce? His cutting tone left no doubt about his disdain. Mr. the Nap quickly stepped in to calm the situation. "That's enough, Panlop. Joyce is just a young woman, and she's clearly shaken up," his father said, trying to mediate. "True," Panlop thought grudgingly. "She is still just a woman. And what should I do with Jod then? Should I have him marry Joyce to take responsibility?" he quipped sarcastically. Jeremy's eyes widened in horror. "That won't be necessary. I only ask for 6 million baht to compensate for the innocence I've lost." Jod audibly gasped, muttering to himself, "I'm done for." "You stay quiet, Jod," Panlop snapped. "I'll deal with you later. As for you, Joyce, fine, I'll pay." Resolving the issue with money was the simplest option. Jeremy left the house with a 6 million baht check. Though she was still angry, she was satisfied with the sum. With that, the matter was considered closed. Now it was Cannon and Jod's turn to face him. "Someone go fetch Cannon. And you, Jod, your punishment for being so gullible is to clean the garage and every single car until they shine. Report back to me when you're done. This isn't over. Now get to work." Jod ran off, his eyes wide with terror. The house had nearly 10 cars, and the garage spanned 4 bays. He was doomed. Jod muttered to himself as he scrubbed one of the cars. "Cannon, this is all your fault." Last night, Cannon had given him a cup of coffee, insisting he drink it quickly and take over guarding Panlop's room. She'd even nagged him to shower first, saying his smell would ruin the boss's sheets. Oblivious, Jod had followed her instructions, but as he began to feel drowsy, a woman had entered the room. Jeremy had approached him with seductive intent, and in his half-conscious state, he'd played along. Now, scrubbing cars under the hot sun, Jod groaned, "I'm doomed." Chapter 14. And just like that, he disappeared. Sujira's delicate hands weakly squeezed the laundry she was washing. She didn't have the heart to do anything else, staring at the pile of clothes in the basin with a heavy heart. Today, she let her mother handle the noodle shop while she secluded herself in the back of the house, washing clothes and sulking like someone nursing a broken heart. She felt like she couldn't live without him anymore. She was smitten, hopelessly so. That idiot. He said he'd come today, didn't he? Leaving me waiting like this. Doesn't he know how agonizing this is? Here, take this, she muttered, scrubbing the clothes furiously as if they were the wretched man himself. "Sujira," her mother called out. "Yes, Ma," she responded, her voice tinged with weariness. "There's someone here to see you," her mother shouted back. Her ears perked up, her eyes widened. She quickly washed her hands clean, brushed her clothes to look presentable, and wished she had time to put on some lip balm. But it was too late now. It's okay, she thought. When someone loves you, even a tired face looks charming. She smiled, filled with hope, as she walked through the back door. Trying to appear annoyed, she planned to make him see how angry she was, even though her heart was leaping with joy. But as soon as she pulled back the curtain, she froze. Standing there wasn't Panlop, but a well-dressed woman in her 50s, carrying an expensive handbag. Her demeanor screamed wealth and high status. The woman glanced at the young girl emerging from the back door with a gaze that made Sujira feel uneasy. Even her mother, standing nearby, looked nervous as she introduced her. "Sujira, this is, Mrs. Jitra, Panlop's mother," her mother said hesitantly. Sujira's eyes widened in shock. She clumsily folded her hands in a polite Y, unsure of how to act. Mrs. Jitra barely acknowledged her and spoke with a tone that seemed to spare no warmth. "I heard you've been seeing my son, so I thought I'd come to see for myself." Her words stung. Sujira pressed her lips together, immediately understanding the woman's intentions. There was no doubt in her mind that Panlop's mother disapproved of her. It was obvious. She didn't even accept the invitation to sit, insisting that she only had a moment to talk. This love is already heading for a dead end, Sujira thought. "Yes, ma'am. Is Mr. Panlop not with you?" she asked politely, even though she knew why Mrs. Jitra had come. "I came for this reason. Don't think I'm cruel, but Panlop already has a fiancé. I hope you understand," Mrs. Jitra stated coldly. Although she had braced herself for this possibility, Sujira still felt a pang of disappointment. She glanced at her mother, who looked at her daughter with pity and sympathy. Sujira forced herself to suppress her sadness, flashing a cheerful smile at Mrs. Jitra. "We're not serious, ma'am. If you're here to make things clear, I completely understand and will do as you ask, she said lightly. Mrs. Jitra sighed in relief, though her gaze still carried a hint of disdain. Do you? Do you really understand what I want? She asked sharply. Sujira chuckled softly, though her heart was breaking. I understand, ma'am. It's not hard to figure out. Even though I'm poor, I've had some education, she retorted lightly. She didn't intend to get involved further but couldn't resist saying something in return. Let's hope you keep your word, young lady. Don't let it be just empty promises to my face while doing something else behind my back, Mrs. Jitra replied, her tone biting. It was hard to believe someone of her stature could be so sharp-tongued. Sujira was debating whether to argue further or let it go when her father emerged unsteadily from the house. Dad, why are you out here? She asked, rushing to support him in alarm. Her father shook his head and turned to Mrs. Jitra with a bright smile. You can trust my daughter, ma'am. She means what she says. Don't worry about losing your son to someone as poor as us. Rest assured, he said firmly, then led his daughter back into the house. Sujira's mother looked on helplessly as her husband called out from inside. Come on in, Yang. I'd like some rice porridge. Mrs. Jitra was left standing there, stunned as if she had been metaphorically slapped. She muttered under her breath. Panlop, oh Panlop. Associating with people like this. Humph. Still, she felt some relief knowing that the matter would soon be resolved and that her son would move on from this foolishness. Chapter 15. That stupid man. Hick. Hick. Since that moment, and up until now, Sujira had been sobbing uncontrollably, pounding her pillow as though it could take away the pain. How could he make someone fall for him? Only for his mother to show up and reveal the truth later. Hick. Tears, mucus, and drool were all mixed together. She didn't care about appearances anymore. Beauty had no place in this moment of despair. Sujira, her mother called, her voice breaking through Sujira's spiraling thoughts. Her mother sat down beside her with a look of compassion. There's more than one man in this world, you know. The more her mother tried to console her, the more Sujira's sadness deepened. Tears continued to flow endlessly. Outside, the sound of her father yelling at someone echoed loudly. Sujira sat up abruptly, her tear-streaked face now filled with curiosity. Ma, what's happening? Her mother shook her head, clearly just as clueless. Together, they rushed to the balcony, where they had a clear view of the front of the noodle shop. Below, Panlop stood defiantly, his face determined, enduring a barrage of angry words from her father. A father's daughter is always precious to him. I won't let my daughter be treated like she's worthless to your family. Sujira's eyes widened as she clasped her hand over her mouth in shock. She tried to signal to him to leave, to stop making things worse. But Panlop stood his ground, trying to explain himself to her father. Jira has never been worthless in my eyes, uncle. I deeply apologize on behalf of my mother for any offense she may have caused to you and your family. He bowed repeatedly in a show of respect, but her father ignored him completely. From the balcony, Sujira watched the scene unfold, anxiety coursing through her. She turned to her mother, desperate for advice. Ma, what should I do? Her mother glanced down at the commotion, then smiled softly at her daughter, her face carrying the wisdom of someone who had weathered life's storms. Ask yourself, Sujira. Don't ask me. You're the one who loves him, not me. But his mother doesn't like me. How can we possibly love each other in a situation like this? She countered, frustration lacing her voice. Then, without waiting for a response, she hurried downstairs. The tension outside was thick as her father stood firm, refusing to let Panlop meet his daughter. He continued to rant about Panlop's mother. Your mother has a sharp tongue. A very sharp one. Is that what being rich does to people? Panlop closed his eyes, exhaling deeply. From yesterday until today, it had been one headache after another. He had been trying to persuade his father to formally propose on his behalf, but his mother had swooped in and tried to sever his relationship with Sujira instead. Asterisk, you want me to be the villain? Fine, I'll show you how bad I can be. Asterisk. When he opened his eyes again, they met Sujira's sad, reproachful gaze. She stood nearby, looking as though she wanted to chastise him. He stepped toward her, but her father blocked him with a wooden stick. The tall man froze, his eyes pleading with her. Jira! He murmured, his face crestfallen. Please leave, Mr. Panlop. This place isn't for you. Go back to your fiancé, she said coldly, her words like a script pulled straight from a melodramatic soap opera. How cliché, and completely unreasonable. He grumbled to himself. Still, he decided to retreat. Fine. I'll leave today. But think about it carefully, Sujira. Don't let my mother's words destroy the good feelings we have for each other. With that, he bowed to her parents and walked briskly to his car. Moments later, the roar of his engine filled the air as he sped off. Sujira's mother clutched her chest in alarm. Why is he driving so fast? He'll end up in an accident at this rate, her mother muttered, sighing heavily as she turned to look at her daughter. Her father had already gone back inside, and her mother soon followed, leaving Sujira alone with her sorrow. She allowed herself to sink into her grief, even as her heart silently called out for him. Hick! It hurt so much. Chapter 16. Panlop drove home quickly, his heart aflame with frustration as he marched into the house. It felt as though his chest was on fire, consumed by anger and pain. Mom! Where are you? I need to talk to you. His voice was sharp and filled with fury, sending chills down Jitra's spine as she realized she might be in trouble. What is it, Panlop? Why are you shouting like this? You're going to give me a heart attack. She emerged from her room in a long flowing nightgown, forcing a sheepish smile. Indeed, she was starting to feel like a cornered tiger. Her son turned to her, his face etched with rage. What did you do? His voice was stern, struggling to contain his anger. Jitra pressed her lips together, trying to maintain composure. I didn't do anything, dear. She shook her head, attempting to deflect. Hidden behind corners and doors, Kanoon and the other servants eavesdropped quietly. Don't lie to me, Mom. Suddenly, a tear rolled down Panlop's cheek. Jitra gasped in shock, clutching her chest. Panlop, are you crying? Her voice was filled with disbelief. Panlop, her wild and reckless son, was crying? He had never cried, not even once as far as she could remember. Not even during his worst troubles. Yes, I'm crying. Do you even love me? His question was unexpected, leaving Jitra dumbfounded, unable to speak. Of course I love you, dear. How could you ask such a thing? She rushed to embrace her son, who now had red tear-streaked eyes. Panlop allowed her to hug him, which was out of character. Soon, both mother and son were crying. What kind of crazy day is this? Do you understand me now, Mom? Panlop finally spoke, his gaze fixed on her as she wiped her tears. Understand what, Panlop? Come on, Mom. He sighed and turned to leave. Jitra grabbed his arm, looking embarrassed. Oh, Panlop, I was just teasing. Yes, I understand now. Panlop smiled faintly, guiding her to sit on the sofa. Why did you treat Jira's family that way, Mom? He decided to confront her directly. Jitra gave him a weak smile. I admit it. I did it because I wanted you to get engaged to Joyce. I think she's a good match for you. Her voice wavered as she confessed. The two sat together, hugging as they poured their hearts out. Both mother and son had been harboring deep-seated feelings for a long time. So, Mom, what should we do now? How can we make Sujira forgive and understand you, like I do? Panlop's faint smile returned, but he sighed deeply. You'll have to help me fix this, Mom, he said. Jitra's eyes widened in disbelief. Her father is scary, Panlop, she muttered nervously. Mom, everyone loves their children. Would it be such a blow to your pride to apologize to them? The room fell silent for a moment before Jitra finally nodded. All right, if that's what you want. Just then, Kanoon stepped out of her hiding spot, speaking up confidently. But I have an idea. It's a bit melodramatic, though. Both mother and son turned to look at the servant. Panlop groaned. Oh, Kanoon, please don't. Just thinking about Kanoon's previous ideas was enough to make him cringe. Yesterday, he'd lost 6 million baht thanks to her schemes. But I want to help, sir, Kanoon said earnestly. Panlop subtly winked at her, signaling her to avoid mentioning yesterday's fiasco. If his mother found out Kanoon was the mastermind behind the incident, it would cause chaos in the household, and Kanoon would undoubtedly lose her job. Kanoon nodded, understanding his signal. You've been kind to me, sir. I just want to repay that kindness. As a woman, I understand what another woman would want from her lover, she said confidently, her eyes sparkling with intelligence. What's that supposed to mean? Am I not a woman too? Jitra interjected, frowning at her son. Panlop nodded, ignoring his mother's outburst. In this house, servants and masters alike can speak freely if it benefits everyone. Jitra glared at her son, annoyed. All right, Kanoon, let's hear your idea. Panlop finally agreed to listen. Kanoon smiled widely, ready to share her plan. Here's the thing. Chapter 17. The sound of an old pickup truck engine rumbled along the winding road of a small village. Sujira gripped the steering wheel tightly, her heart racing erratically. Her mind was overwhelmed with unanswered questions. Terminal cancer? And he just found out now? She murmured to herself, feeling that the whole situation was too strange to believe. Despite her doubts, her emotions drove her forward. She couldn't ignore the possibility that Panlop, the man she had unwittingly fallen for, might truly be facing his final moments. Tears threatened to spill as she shook her head, trying to push away the wave of sorrow and confusion. Back at home, Sujira's parents watched the dust from her truck fade into the distance. Your acting skills were remarkable, her father said, reclining in his chair with an expression caught between amusement and exasperation. I felt chills just listening to you. Sujira's mother, descended the stairs, her face flushed with embarrassment. Oh, come on, hey. The family on his side went to such lengths to apologize and make amends. The kids are in love. Let them sort things out. The truth of the matter was that this was all part of an elaborate plan devised by everyone involved. They hoped this would give Sujira and Panlop a chance to reconcile and work through their misunderstandings. I'm not criticizing them, her father replied, raising an eyebrow. I'm talking about you. That performance was dripping with melodrama. Rolled her eyes, clearly trying to suppress a grin. Oh, hush now, hey. It's all for the best. After all, what matters most is their happiness. In reality, the father shared his wife's sentiment. Despite his gruff exterior and sharp remarks, he deeply cared for his daughter. Seeing someone wealthy and loving like Panlop sincerely vying for Sujira's affection gave him peace of mind. The heart of a parent is simple. They only wish for their children to find happiness. For Sujira's father, this plan, no matter how over the top, was worth it if it could bring his daughter joy. Chapter 18. She's here, exclaimed Kanan as she rushed to inform Conchitra and Panlop, who were enjoying a hearty lunch. Kun the Nap looked confused as he sat at the dining table. It was unusual for him to be home on a weekday. What's going on? What do you mean, she's here? Without wasting a second, Panlop bolted toward his room, leaving his parents behind. Chitra exchanged amused glances with her husband. The kids are trying to make up, she explained with a chuckle. When Lafa's girlfriend gets here, just go along with whatever's happening, all right? The Nap nodded, though he didn't fully understand what was going on. Moments later, Sujira entered the house. Her steps hurried with concern. She froze at the sight of Conchitra standing in the living room, but she quickly composed herself and greeted her politely. This time, to Sujira's surprise, Chitra returned the gesture with a why of her own. How odd. But Sujira had no time to overthink. Her mind was preoccupied with worry about Panlop. How is Kun Panlop, ma'am? Is he all right? She asked anxiously. Chitra glanced at her husband before putting on a sorrowful expression. Oh dear child. Lof is in his room upstairs. Please go see him. But first, I owe you an apology. I'm sorry for the harsh words I said to you a few days ago. She reached out to hold Sujira's hand gently. The younger woman blinked, trying to process what was happening. Meanwhile, the Nap sipped his coffee, struggling to suppress laughter at the theatrical exchange. Can you forgive me, dear? Chitra asked, her eyes pleading. Of course, ma'am. I wasn't angry with you, just a little hurt, Sujira admitted honestly. Chitra pulled her into a sudden hug. Startled, Sujira awkwardly returned the embrace. Oh, what a kind-hearted girl you are. But please call me Mom, all right? What a sudden change in attitude. Wealthy people were indeed hard to understand. Breaking away from the hug, Sujira asked, May I go see Kun Panlop now? Please. Of course, of course. Kanan dear, take Sujira to Lafa's room. Kanan nodded cheerfully and led Sujira upstairs. Upon reaching the room, Kanan flashed a knowing smile and motioned toward the door. Go ahead, she said, stepping aside. Sujira hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, she saw Panlop lying on the bed, looking weak and frail. Her heart sank. Kun Panlop, she whispered as she rushed to his side, her face full of concern. Feigning exhaustion, Panlop opened his eyes slowly. The guilt of deceiving her weighed heavily on him when he saw her tear-streaked face. Don't cry, Jira, he murmured softly. But his words only made her sob harder, her shoulders shaking with emotion. What should I do now? Panlop thought frantically, hating to see her like this. He decided to act impulsively. Sitting up, he pulled her onto his lap and kissed her deeply. Sujira let out a muffled sound of surprise as his lips claimed hers. Driven by love, and perhaps her own unspoken feelings, she allowed him to deepen the kiss, responding hesitantly at first, then more fervently. Their emotions ignited as the room filled with the sound of their tender exchange. Just as Panlop began to ease her back onto the bed, Sujira pushed him away, her cheeks flushed. Kun Panlop, you're sick. You need to rest. Not really, Jira. I just wanted to see if you'd stop being mad at me, he admitted, leaning in for another kiss. But this time, she stood abruptly, her anger bubbling to the surface. You think this is funny? Pretending to be sick? Is this all a joke to you? Realizing she'd been tricked, Sujira stormed toward the door, only to find it locked. Kun! The door is locked, she exclaimed in surprise. Panlop couldn't help but laugh. Oh, Canon, you're a genius. Infuriated, Sujira turned to face him. Unlock the door this instant, she demanded. Instead of complying, Panlop scooped her up in his arms and carried her back to the bed. The key isn't with me, he said mischievously. This door won't open until you forgive me. Forgive you? After everything you've done? Forget it, she huffed, still fuming. Then I might just have to convince you by force, he teased, his voice dripping with playful menace. Don't you dare, she shouted, but her tone softened as relief replaced her earlier worry. He wasn't sick after all. Jira, let's talk, Panlop said earnestly. Do you love me? Caught off guard by his question, she stammered. I do. But, good. That's all I needed to hear, he interrupted, silencing her with a finger on her lips. Now let's go downstairs and talk to my parents. She nodded, her resolve weakening. Fine. Let's go. As she moved to leave, Panlop held her back, pulling her into another embrace. But first, let's revisit some memories, he whispered. Wow. No way. That's embarrassing, she protested, though her voice was barely audible as his lips found hers once more. Do you love this wild man of yours? He asked teasingly, pinning her beneath him with a smirk. Blushing, Sujira shyly admitted her feelings. Yes, she loved him with all her heart. Her wild, handsome Panlop. Though their story had started with misunderstandings, it ended with a love so genuine that it felt like destiny. Sujira couldn't help but feel like the luckiest woman alive. Subscribe now for more interesting stories.